Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Thursday, April 25th, 2013. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Obviously, on the corporate media, the Boston-o-thon is continuing, or maybe they should call it the Marathon-thon, or whatever they're going to name it. It's like a big production showcase. It's just nonstop. Boston, 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 Boston. The Texas fertilizer factory explosion is all but gone, even though it killed far more people. And we know where the culprit is. The factory was hit with an OSHA violation for improperly storing these explosive chemicals. OSHA never went back to follow up. Nobody's making a big deal about that. It's all Boston, pressure cookers, Muslim, serious right-wing Christians, bloggers. They're trying to blame everybody on this whole thing, and they're actually undermining their own credibility, pointing the finger in all these different directions here. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But the bottom line here is that the public story of Boston is pretty much shredded at this point. The corporate media has been spending all kinds of insane money trying to sell this story with all the, the location. They're sending their people up to Boston, so I'm standing right on the scene of whatever. All of that stuff costs money. They're just hurling huge amounts of money into this sales campaign, which is really what it is, at a time when we all know the corporate media is very short of funding because they're losing their audience, they're losing their advertisers, and yet somehow they seem to have all the money they need to go up there with their eye-in-the-sky camera. We're going to go back and look at we're going to show you the blood stains. Here we are going into 2 weeks after this whole thing. That's not news. That's a sales pitch. But despite all of the corporate media's money and all the corporate media's men, they can't put this official story back together again. We ran a little poll on whatreallyhappened.com. Who did the Boston bombing? There were only two choices: Muslims and U.S. government with possible assistance from Israel. And the U.S. government with possible assistance from Israel got 98%. And the rest of those votes say screaming Muslims are probably all the intelligence assets they have monitoring this communication on behalf of various governments and corporations. So, salute to our friends in national surveillance here. And again, the story has taken another major body check because now the police are admitting that the younger brother, Dzhokhar, when he was in that boat, had no guns at all. Zero, zip, nada. You remember a little while ago, he engaged in a shootout. The police had to shoot that very expensive boat full of holes. They were in a firefight for their lives. They had to defend themselves. And then Dzhokhar tried to commit suicide and shot himself in the throat. With what? And remember, a few days ago, we posted that picture of Dzhokhar climbing out of the boat under his own power with no sign of blood on the front of his shirt, which you would get from a wound to the throat. And so now they're saying, well, he didn't actually have any guns. So the big question is, who did shoot him in the throat after he had surrendered? That's a very important question. And again, the story just keeps changing over and over again. Now we're getting more details about the cop at MIT who was shot in his patrol car, and they're now saying it was execution style. And they're saying these two brothers did it because they needed a gun. No, I think some third party did it because they needed the police to be in a shoot-first mindset, which is what this whole thing at the boat now proves happened. They just opened fire on the guy. They wanted him dead. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, we're seeing all over the corporate media this issue about the Miranda rights. And he was supposedly, our suspect was read the Miranda rights, and then he shut up. And it's kind of an interesting little way they put it here. This is from Newsnet5.com, and this is a direct quote. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev immediately stopped talking after a magistrate judge and a representative from the U.S. Attorney's Office entered his hospital room and gave him his Miranda warning. According to 4 officials of both political parties briefed on the interrogation. They insisted on anonymity because the briefing was private. Okay, let's see, next quote. Before being advised of his rights, the 19-year-old suspect told authorities that his older brother, Tamerlan, had only recently recruited him to be part of the attack that detonated the pressure cooker bombers at the marathon finish line. 2 U.S. officials said. Let's go back to the first part of that thing. Dzhokhar immediately stopped talking. Talking? Weren't they telling us just yesterday he couldn't talk? And according to his Israeli doctor, he'll never talk again because he tried to shoot himself and wounded his own throat, except now we know that's a lie. He had no guns at the boat. He wasn't shooting at the police. He didn't shoot himself. So somebody else shot him in the throat. Now, setting that aside, because that's just a light bit of fluff and semantics here, if I were on the jury trying Dzhokhar, I wouldn't take the word of any U.S. government official at this point, after all the lies we've already exposed on this thing. And in any event, this is hearsay testimony. According to U.S. officials, he said this. That's hearsay testimony. That's inadmissible in a court of law. The part that concerns me, and we're seeing this all over the corporate media, is they're trying to say, well, you know, we should delay Miranda rights for terror suspects. By the way, Miranda rights do not start when you are informed of them. They are automatically, by default, in all places. The reason for the Miranda warning is a guarantee that the suspect knows his rights under the law. Most of us probably already know them from watching them recited endlessly on TV. But his Miranda rights didn't begin until that announcement. And by the way, under U.S. law, anything that he said or typed or nodded to prior to that is also inadmissible in a court of law. And so what we're seeing here is, I think, the beginnings of a propaganda attack on the Miranda rights to take them away so the police can basically beat you into any confession they want and it will be admissible. They can yell at you. You don't have a lawyer there to protect your rights. Oh, we've got to do that. They're terror suspects. He was reciting the Constitution. That makes him a terror suspect. And we now know from this former administration official who is now willing to publicly testify that a lot of those people, the vast majority of those prisoners down in Guantanamo who were being tortured to provide politically expedient confessions, were innocent. And Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld knew they were innocent, but they kept the torture going, kept them locked up because it would have been an embarrassment to let them go and say, golly gee shuckies, we were wrong, sorry about all the waterboarding. And the razor cuts to delicate parts of your body, which we know has also been done. So they're basically, the government wants to take away your Miranda right protections, your right to remain silent, your right to the presence of an attorney. They want to take that away. They're using this Boston false flag to take that away. And again, more evidence that these 2 brothers were intelligence assets is continuing to surface. Over at Washington's blog, they're basically quoting Izvestian. We touched on this briefly yesterday. The older brother, Tamerlan, attended a workshop sponsored by an American organization on how to destabilize the Russian satellite states. These guys were intelligence assets of the United States of America. This is probably the reason when Russia asked the United States to investigate Tamerlan, the FBI came back and said, nope, he's clean, nothing wrong there. Really, you can trust him. Honest, you can take him into all your private meetings. He's trustworthy completely. Same stuff they did with Lee Harvey Oswald. So the situation keeps changing. They had a guy, then they didn't have a guy. Oh, they had guns, then they didn't have guns. Oh, they, and the whole confusion over the naked man, which we now know was Tamerlan, now that we know that the driver they tried to claim was the naked man was Chinese. I got an email from somebody asking, maybe the government wants to have all this confusion so we can't find the truth of the matter. Well, when they're hiding their guilt, definitely they will start sowing a lot of confusion. But you need to remember, the ultimate objective of any false flag, of any propaganda, is to present a clear and unequivocal narrative to the public to sell the agenda. Lee Harvey Oswald did it. You don't need to look any further. To attain that objective, the people have to trust that narrative that is being presented to them in the corporate media. What we're seeing here in the aftermath of Boston, this constant changing of stories, undermines trust in the narrative. The continued pointing of fingers at all these different possible culprits undermines trust in the narrative, and that defeats the whole purpose of the propaganda and the false flag. Now, the other day I said that the corporate media and the propagandists had lost the initiative, and we're continuing to see more evidence of that. Rachel Maddow was apparently on a tear the other night, just frothing over this idea of false flag, and our government would never come. There's no such thing as a false flag, and we're beginning to start seeing that pop up in other places in the corporate media. Oh, false flag, that's just another wacko conspiracy theory. There's no such thing as a false flag. Nobody would do that. That's the new spin that's coming on out. If you believe in false flags, you are a conspiracy wacko. You probably think that, and they'll just go off on whatever else they can find. You probably think there was a plane at the Pentagon or whatever else they're using on that here. But apparently Maddow was going out there and just screaming, there's no such thing as a false flag. You're all being wacko kooks to think so. And yet we know it is an historical reality. Let's see, a couple of quotes here. Terrorism is the best political weapon, for nothing drives people harder than a fear of sudden death. That's Adolf Hitler, who, by the way, pulled off one of history's best-known false flags, having his own people attack the radio station in Gleiwitz, Germany, and framing Poland for it. There's another quote for you. Why, of course the people don't want war, but after it all is... rented lips. But after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine the policy. And it's always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they're being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country. That's Hermann Goering. One more quote before we head on out here. The easiest way to gain control of a population is to carry out acts of terror. The public will clamor for such laws if their personal security is threatened. That's Joseph Stalin. And I've gotten a lot of emails from people saying, oh, you can't equate our government with the Nazis and with communist Russia. Our government is good, and their governments were bad. Well, the historical reality is the government of the United States of America is no better or no worse than any other government we've seen in history. All these governments are dominated by sociopaths who will lie, cheat, steal, and kill to attain power, and once they have the power, they go on lying, cheating, stealing, and killing because that's what always worked for them. The Nuremberg trials, they had a major with the Nazi SS admitting they were faking attacks on their own people to build the case for war. The CIA admitted it hired Iranians in the 1950s to pose as communists and set off bombs in Iran in order to overthrow that government, to take out the democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, and install the Shah of Iran. Israel got caught in a false flag down in Egypt, the Lavon affair. Israeli agents planted bombs, left evidence to frame Egyptians and Egyptian Muslims for these attacks on British and American assets. They got caught on that. They were forced to officially admit it. When Israel attacked the USS Liberty, they were out there at the forefront. Oh, it's Egypt is doing it. Egypt is doing it. False flags are a reality. Because remember, any time the leader of any nation wants to start a war, they have to lie and trick their own people into it. No leader in history ever got up and said, I want all of you to give me your children. We're going to march over into this next country and steal all their gold and jewels just because I feel like having them. The people of the nation would say, you're out of your mind. War is a dangerous, hard occupation. It pays very, very poorly. There's a real chance you're going to get killed or crippled in it. They don't want to go to war. They don't want to leave their homes and travel to the next nation or the next continent or to the other side of the world to shoot at people they've never met. So every war in history has been started with a lie. You will go to heaven if you help us invade the Holy Lands and seize them from whoever they're seizing them from this week. Operation Northwoods. They were going to blow up American airplanes and blame it on Cuba. That was in the official U.S. government record. False flags are a reality. And if Rachel Maddow is out there on MSNBC screaming that anybody who thinks that there's such a thing as false flags, you're a conspiracy wacko, basically tells us that Rachel has sold out to the power structure. She likes her cushy, well-paying job on MSNBC, and she's not going to do anything to jeopardize that. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with a phone call after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to grab a phone call. Sparky in Ohio. Aloha, Sparky. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. You were just talking about Gleichowitz. Have you ever read any of David Irving's works, the British historian?
You mean Gleichowitz?
Gleichowitz, sorry.
Okay. I've read some of his works. I haven't read them on the situation in Gleichowitz, but the history of that is pretty well documented. It was a false flag.
Michael, David Irving went over all the old papers, and he never found anything in the papers on it. And my family that came from Germany over to Canada and America, they never learned about it until their kids were learned about it in American schools.
Well, look at how much we're learning about things that happened, decades ago that were hidden from us, like Operation Northwoods.
Oh, right, but I'm telling you, the German people, it wasn't in the paper, and the German people didn't hear about it, so, I mean, using it as a thing.
Again, Sparky, look how much our government hides things from the American people. We're only just now finding out that our government really was torturing people in Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib. The governments don't reveal to their people things that they want to keep secret. And obviously, if Hitler's trying to start a war with a false flag incident, he's not going to turn around to the German people and say, by the way, it was all a hoax. We just faked it.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that the fact that the German people of the day didn't know what had happened is kind of pointless. In any event, you basically had, one of the guys who was tried at Nuremberg, Alfred Najax, basically said, under orders from Heydrich and Mueller, the heads of the Gestapo, they took a bunch of German operatives, dressed them in Polish uniforms. They took along a Polish prisoner and killed him on the spot so that the body would be found. I mean, this is very, very well documented here. Anyway, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Okay. Guess what? Somebody somewhere wants you to think there's no such thing as a false flag attack. That's what Rachel was telling you last night. There's no such thing as a false flag attack. It never happened. It's all a conspiracy theory. Next, they're going to start pouring in with HARP and chemtrails and Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot's love child, who's running for president in 2016, I guess. Oh, now, speaking of major snafus in the official story, remember right after the Boston bombing, they had arrested this Saudi national. It was all over the news. We've got a Saudi national. He's the guilty party. And then they had to let him go. And last Friday, Glenn Beck teased a story that he had evidence of a government cover-up and he was going to give the government till Monday to come clean. And, of course, the government ignored him, as do so many others. And he came out and he started talking about this Saudi national who was arrested and let go. Why did they let him go? Maybe because they didn't have any evidence on the guy. And now, of course, we have a U.S. congressman who says he's going to follow up on Glenn Beck's Saudi national theory. And I don't think they understand that when they start pointing fingers in so many directions, it undermines trust in the narrative. So the House Committee on Homeland Security is requesting information from Janet Napolitano on this Saudi national, and they're out there to say, it's the Saudis, we've got to go after the Saudis. It's Israel that wants us to go after the Saudis. After Iran, Saudi Arabia is going to be next. That's what's going on here. But they have already hoisted on their own petard on this one, because this Saudi national, Al-Harbi, is a good friend of the Obamas. The First Lady visited him in the hospital. And he's been to the White House a few times. He's on the visitor logs, cleared in by the Secret Service to hang out with the First Family. Now, how many times have you been to the White House? I've never been to the White House, and I'm not a Mideast terrorist. I'm annoying and irritating and obnoxious, but I'm not a terrorist. I've never even been to the city of Washington, D.C., which is disappointing. A lot of really good museums there. But it turns out this Saudi national is, again, some kind of an asset who is cleared for the White House. So Glenn Beck and this House committee have hoisted on their own petard on that one. Everybody's overreacting. Terror, 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 terror. Right here in Hawaii, on the island of Oahu, they've closed down a block around the circuit court in Honolulu. They've evacuated a couple of public schools. There's a suspicious package we're waiting to hear if it turns out to be somebody's dirty laundry or something like that. Williams-Sonoma is going to pull pressure cookers off their shelves out of respect to the victims of Boston. I mean, it's all marketing. It's just another excuse to get this onto the news. You know, now they're screaming about, you know, were these brothers, were they receiving taxpayer assistance for their education and so forth. Any excuse they can to just try and keep this story current. And frankly, from the flailing and thrashing, I think the American people are already burned out on these two brothers. And at least Fox News and MSNBC are starting to bring other news back into the rotation. CNN is still all Boston all the time here. But, of course, the bottom line here is most Americans are convinced this was a false flag to bring about more tyranny. And a lot of the attention is now focusing on the CISPA bill and just how incredibly draconian and intrusive this is. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with a phone call and more about CISPA after these words from our team. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the corporate media is still pounding on the fact that valuable intelligence may have been lost by reading the suspect his Miranda rights. So they're really out there. This is an attack on your Miranda rights. Your right to have an attorney present, your right to remain silent. Real Gestapo stuff out there. All right, before we get into CISPA, I'm going to grab a quick phone call here. Tate in Michigan. Aloha, Tate. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Have you had a chance to see Rand Paul's flip-flop on the drone?
Well, yeah, and I've never been impressed with Rand Paul, to be very honest. He's not his father's son politically and philosophically.
We should have known he was a piece of trash when he passed Citizens United. Okay, because corporations are not people. And now he's okay.
Wait a minute. Citizens United was a Supreme Court decision.
He supported that.
Well, okay, but he didn't pass it. He supported it, but he didn't pass it. I just wanted to be clear on that.
His comments about it were supportive of it. And
yes.
I knew he was a piece of trash, and he's nothing like his father. And he's okay with armed drones shooting somebody because they robbed $50. You know, and he's like, well, I don't want drones over my hot tub in my backyard. What a piece of crap.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. And now we know, which, you know, as far as I'm concerned, if he tries to run in 2016, which there have been rumors about, he's going to try and ride his father's coattails, and he's going to find that he can't, because the people who admired and supported his father have a very clear model of what Ron Paul stood for, and Rand Paul just isn't there.
Does anybody in Washington, D.C. have a set of vegetables? I mean, they're so weak. I don't care if they threaten your life, your family's life. You don't get into that position to try to fix a country and not sacrifice everything. They're weak people.
Well, it's worse than that. We know from the drone strikes into these other countries, some of which we're not actually at war with, that every time they take out a suspect who apparently doesn't have a right to the presence of an attorney before he's executed, they take out an average of 50 innocent bystanders. That same statistic is going to be happening here in the United States.
And the same people that cheered as their rights were taken away because they were looking for that 19-year-old kid, they're cheering in the streets.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the same people who care about Snooki lost all her weight after she had her baby. These people are just stupid drones.
Well, there is a segment of the population like that, but they're a dwindling minority. I went back and I looked at some of the videos of the Bostonians supposedly cheering in the streets, And one thing I saw is there were only a few people with flags, and they were cheering, and everybody else was just kind of standing around. And being an audio-video editor from many, many years ago, it was pretty obvious to me that the chanting of USA, USA was being augmented on the soundtrack. So that, too, is just another part of this illusion that Americans are perfectly happy with people kicking down doors, pointing guns at them, even though they've committed no crime, ransacking their homes, confiscating their guns, we're now hearing reports of, and then just heading on out and leaving muddy jackboot prints all over the carpeting. And no, nobody's happy with that. I have friends and family in Massachusetts. I've been talking to a great many of them. They say no, they absolutely did not agree with any of this.
Well, I hope we can change this thing around, but man, it's looking hopeless to me.
Well, it's very obvious the government is on a path leading to complete tyranny, but they're having to rush it. They're having to rush the timetable to try and stay ahead of the collapsing economy. Because if the economy collapses first, everybody in America is going to point the finger of blame where it deserves to go, Wall Street and Washington, D.C. So they're in this rush to try and get this global world war, nuclear war going, so they can duck responsibility for their crimes and corruption. They've done it twice before. Now they're trying to do it a third time. But we know what they're up to.
Hey, on a side point, you should check out Oblivion, the movie. It was pretty cool.
Okay, I'll make a point of looking at it after the radio show today.
Thank you, sir.
All right, you got it. Now, getting on to CISPA. This bill is being promoted as a means to protect critical infrastructure from hacker attacks. But if you go into it and you look at it, it basically means the end of all online privacy. And they specifically mention, when you look at the interviews of people supporting CISPA, they're talking about protecting the government of the United States from independent operatives like WikiLeaks. Now, I personally think WikiLeaks is just another intelligence operation, but what they're basically talking about is CISPA is designed to go after the independent media. Because the government doesn't like the fact that they can't lie to you with impunity anymore, like they did back in the golden days of the Cold War in the 1950s and the 1960s, and they could wave communists at you, and you would immediately soil yourself and throw your money and your children onto the designated enemies. These bozos in Washington, D.C., they yearn for the return to the golden age where they could just tell you any pile of bovine excrement they felt like, and you would just believe. And you would allow your belief to convince you to do whatever the government was trying to tell you to do. And those days are gone, and they're gone forever. That's the really important point that these propagandists haven't quite got their brains around yet. The Internet, the blogs, the independent media have changed the fundamental nature of information flow through society, just as dramatically as when Gutenberg rediscovered movable type printing. And there is no going back. Those institutions and governments that can evolve to adapt to the new reality will survive. Those that can't are doomed to extinction. The problem with the United States government is they have so many lies that they're having to protect, this accumulation of lies over the last 2 centuries that they're constantly having to spend resources and time and money to protect. Traps them in their mind. They must go on doing what worked before, but what worked before is not working now. When John F. Kennedy was assassinated, it took something like 34 years to reach a point where 50% of Americans polled no longer believed the Warren Report. 33 years. Today, and Boston just proved it again, the lifespan of a government deception can be clocked with an egg timer. And they don't get it yet. They don't get it. One of the biggest reasons for hope is they don't get it. They don't understand the world has changed around them, and the old rules do not work any longer. So anyway, Judge Napolitano is out there saying CISPA is a direct assault on your privacy. We understand that Obama, because CISPA is meeting some serious opposition in the Senate, it passed the House already, that Obama is implementing CISPA with executive orders to basically allow the government complete access, unrestricted, to all of your online communications and your data. But there is, and apparently the Department of Justice has already handed out immunity to Internet service providers if they are caught helping the government surveil you and spy on you, you can't sue them, or you won't be allowed to sue them. It's just like the foreclosure fraud. When it all came to light and the scandal blew open, the Department of Justice said, we're not going to arrest anybody, we're not going to charge anybody, they'll pay us a few bucks out of the money they made, we'll give them back to all those homeowners who had their homes stolen illegally, whole $500. And some of those checks are bouncing, by the way. And that's what they're going to do on this one. Now, there is a positive bit of news because there's a landmark case up in Wisconsin that has set the legal precedent that the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination does in fact apply to encryption keys. U.S. Magistrate William Callahan, Jr. of Wisconsin has ruled that citizens do not have to provide an encryption key to law enforcement. The government cannot compel you to decode what is on your smartphone, your tablet, your laptop. And there's an interesting implication because this case went to court because the FBI was unable to read the data on the defendant's laptop. They had no success getting the data. We may presume that the FBI availed themselves of the NSA. And what this really tells us, the important part of this decision, along with the reaffirmation of the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, is that the FBI and the NSA are not as good at breaking your codes as we are led to believe. Now, as I've mentioned many, many times before on this show, there are two parts to reading an encrypted message. The first part is you've got to find out the methodology. How is it being encrypted? Then you have to find the key with which a particular message was encrypted. Of the two, the methodology is the most difficult. If you're using one of the popular approved encryption systems like PGP, they already know the methodology. And finding your keys is just a brute force exercise using racks and racks of computers, which the NSA certainly has a great many of them. But if you have your own encryption system and your own methodology, it's going to be much more difficult. Now, I don't know about the case of this particular defendant. His name is Feldman. But the FBI and presumably the NSA were unable to read his encrypted messages, and they went to court and said, compel him to give us his encryption key, and the judge said, no, it's a violation of the Fifth Amendment. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. I mean, if you are needing to encrypt your data, you can layer. You can encrypt your message in one system with one key, then encrypt that file with a second system and a second key. Defeats a dictionary test. Even a rote 13 on your clear text is going to defeat automated dictionary searches. Because what they do is they try a key and they scan the result for recognizable words. Try another key, scan the result for recognizable words. And if what you encrypted was itself encrypted or rote 13, that dictionary approach is going to fail completely. If you are a person who really does need to have encrypted communications, you need to invest the time and money to develop your own. So the methodology is not known. Remember, the Allies were not able to break the German Enigma machine until they physically captured one of the machines. We're starting to see a hue and cry to disable public police scanners on the website that allowed most of America to hear the errors, mistakes, misreports. I remember when they were over the boat where Zokar was in. And the police scanner, the police command was telling the police officers in the field, use your cell phones. What you're doing is going out over the Internet. They knew they were being watched. But of course, that's what's supposed to happen. It's called transparency. The people have an inherent right to watch the police and the government at any and all times to make sure the police and the government are working for we the people. And now they're trying to shut that down. A lot of police departments have gone to encrypted police radios. Scanners in the United States of America, by law, have large areas of the bands blocked out. Other countries, you don't have that. You can buy a scanner in other countries that'll go from 30 megahertz up to 1.5 gigahertz, continuous. You can listen to everything. Here in the United States, oh no, this band is blocked out because the government's using it. This band is blocked out because this government agency is using it. They're trying to remove your right to know what the government is up to. And you do have a right to know. It's inherent. And because of the Ninth Amendment to the Constitution, you are presumed to have that right. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights was written to limit and hamstring the government, not the people. Ninth Amendment, just because a right is not in the Constitution, does not mean you can deny it to the people. 10th Amendment, if it's not in the Constitution, the government doesn't have that right. It is clearly biased in favor of we, the people. Now they're talking about ending public police scanners. Put a scanner on the website, go to jail. By the way, a little bit of history. Ever hear of Sacco and Vanzetti? It's another famous false flag frame-up in Boston from many years ago, where these two guys got framed, got punished. Remember Bruno Richard Hauptmann? There was this huge anti-foreigner fever in the country, and they needed a villain in the Lindbergh kidnapping, so they framed Bruno Richard Hauptmann for the crime. These things happen all the time, and they've happened all the way through history here. Now, a little follow-up, kind of a little bit of tragic news. There was this student from Brown University named Sunil Tripathi who was being Twittered, emailed around the net as looking like one of the photos of our wanted suspects. I got sent this, and I said, it doesn't look like him to me. So I never ran with that story. But apparently it was big news all over the place. It has now been confirmed that this guy who was falsely linked to the Boston bombing is dead. They found his body in the Providence River. He's been missing for more than a month. And again, somebody was trying to lay the... He's one of them Muslim types. And the Muslim bashing is just going crazy all over the corporate media. Even Jon Stewart, who won't go into that whole false flag thing, but even he was starting to point out on the corporate media, Ann Coulter is out there saying that you should be arrested and thrown in jail just for wearing a hijab. Can you say racist? Can you say a complete repeat of how the Nazis demonized the Jews? And just because our corporate media is doing it to the Muslims does not make it any more moral or acceptable. It's the same tactics all over again. Now, we need to talk about Syria because obviously this timeline that Obama promised Netanyahu about we'll be at war with Syria by then, we'll be at war with Iran by this, seems to be proceeding apace. They're trying to whip up this anti-Muslim fury over the Boston bombing. They're not getting any traction, but they're still moving forward. Today, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel is saying the U.S. intelligence community believes the Syrian regime used the chemical weapon sarin on their own population. They've crossed a red line. Everybody's talking in red lines. I'd like to remind everybody here about when the U.S. government used a banned poison gas, illegal to use in time of war, and they used it on that church down in Waco, Texas. So I didn't think the U.S. government has the moral right to point fingers at anybody else. And after all the caterwauling about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, prudence demands we view this latest screeching about Syria's weapons of mass destruction with a good dose of healthy skepticism. In any event, this so-called civil war is nothing of the sort. It is yet another covert attempt at overthrow by hired mercenary armies. And as I commented yesterday, proof that this is an invasion and not a popular uprising is demonstrated by the numerous acts of terror carried out by the Free Syria Army, most of whom are not Syrian. Yesterday they bombed a minaret at this historic mosque. It's like 15th century, I think, if I remember correctly. In January, they bombed the building itself. That proves it's not a popular uprising. And again, to put it in context, can you imagine George Washington and Thomas Jefferson trying to evict the British government by burning down colonial churches? That sort of behavior does not build the popular support for a true popular revolution. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about Chuck Hagel coming out today and saying, yes, we have evidence that Syria used sarin gas on their own population. Well, Chuck, after that whopper the U.S. government told us all about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, I'd like to see what that proof is. And not just Iraq. Remember when Monica Lewinsky was going to testify before Congress about the blue dress and all the rest of that, and she walks out of the hearing expecting a staircase full of the media, and it was completely empty because Clinton had gone off and bombed a suspected chemical weapons factory in Sudan. And it turned out to be an aspirin factory, which you, the taxpayer, got to pay for rebuilding after it was all over. And the evidence on that was they had taken some soil out of a planter full of roses because the rest of the area was paved over, and it tested positive for chemical weapons. Actually, what they found was rose dust, the stuff that any gardener growing roses will sprinkle on the plants to keep the bugs off. And even if they found traces of sarin gas in Syria, are they telling us it's personally autographed by Assad and not being done by the Free Syria Army, which is running around killing people, civilians, blowing up mosques and other acts of terror? And we have already documented they have chemical weapons. They have gone through the training on how to deploy them. So this idea that there's evidence that Syria is using sarin on its own people, that's a bit of a reach. That is a bit of a reach. And only yesterday, just 24 hours ago, Chuck Hagel was out there saying that he was very skeptical of these claims coming out of Israel that Syria was using chemical weapons. In fact, he even went so far as to say that he was very surprised of this Israeli claim because when he was having his meeting with Moshe Yaalon, they didn't even mention it. Kind of makes you what else they're not telling you, right, John? So 24 hours, what a difference a day makes. And they're out there screaming, Syria, Syria, Syria. The British government is now out there with a scaremongering campaign. We've got to go in and deal with these evil people. A carbon copy. I'm giving my age away here. An exact copy of the same scaremongering campaign that they did just before Afghanistan and Iraq. It's just a repeat. They dragged up the old files, they did a search and replace, take out Iraq, put in Syria, put it out in the corporate media. Going on and on and on. Now, little side note before the top of the hour. As they talk about Syria and sarin gas, the New York Police Department and the federal government are getting ready for another drill, simulating airborne weapons on the New York City subway system. And we know that every time there's one of these false flag terror attacks, there always seems to conveniently be some kind of a drill in the same vicinity at the same time, simulating the exact same terror attack. So I would think those poor people in New York have suffered enough, but I would be very, very nervous considering how desperate they are to start the war. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And following up on this Boston Marathon situation, we are now seeing on the corporate media today that the Boston Bombers had planned an attack in New York. So following on that story about the upcoming drill regarding airborne weapons inside the subway system, are they setting the stage? Was Boston merely the warm-up act and the main event yet to come? Is Obama going to get up there and say, let's get ready to rumble? And they'll have something really, really big. I was saying earlier in the week, given that this cover story is crumbling very fast, the usual government reaction is to stage an even bigger event so people stop talking about the earlier one. They did it during TWA 800. U.S. Navy accidentally shot down a 747. Everybody along the southern coast of Long Island and along New Jersey saw it happen. They couldn't control the story, so 1 week later, Olympic Park bombing. And the corporate media drops all the questions and doubts about TWA 800. Bombing in Beirut killed all those Marines that Israel seemed to have that strange foreknowledge of. And actually, it was documented Israel did know it was going to happen, didn't tell the United States, because a bunch of dead Marines help Israel than a bunch of live Marines. 1 week later, invade Grenada, change the focus, change the story. That's how the public's minds are manipulated. If at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. If the first lie is falling apart, come out with a bigger lie. And so I'm very concerned about this idea that these two brothers were planning a bigger attack in New York. And I think maybe it's good to go back and look at all the lies that were used to sell us that war in Iraq. And to remember, there is nothing new in a government lying to the people to start a war. And every time a government, a ruler, a despot, a tyrant wants to start a war, they have to lie and trick their people into it, to create an illusion that going to war is the only possible choice they can make. If we don't attack them, they'll kill us. If you will invade the Holy Lands and recover them, you will go to heaven, no matter what you did sinful in your life. We need to go back and look at Iraq. They've got weapons of mass destruction. They've got portable biological weapons laboratories that turned out to be hydrogen generators to inflate weather balloons. Remember all those pictures they were showing, these little blobby black and white pictures, which was strange because all of our modern surveillance satellites, spy satellites, take pictures in color. But they had the black and white blurry pictures, and we've had to blur these to protect our national assets. That white blob is a portable decontamination vehicle. When they finally got in there, they found out it was just a regular fire truck. That's how these things get started, and they're doing it to you again. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Meanwhile, back there in Israel, the Israeli ambassador to the UN, Ron Prosser, is saying sanctions have not stopped the Iranian centrifuges. You've got to go to, you send your children to make war on Iran. Now, Iran's centrifuges are needed to make fuel for their nuclear power station. Iran is legally allowed to have centrifuges and a nuclear power station under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran has signed and the United States has signed, but Israel has not. Rumor and innuendo aside, there is no evidence Iran is doing anything outside the limits of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran has not invaded another nation in a war of aggression for over 200 years. A record of peace not even approached by Israel, that can't seem to go 6 months without attacking somebody, or the United States, which remains the only nation in history to actually use nuclear weapons of mass destruction against the civilians of another country, will be. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And remember where I said earlier in regards to Rachel Maddow, that the new spin is that anybody who even suspects Boston was a false flag or that our government would ever do something that heinous and despicable and nefarious is just being silly. And this appears to be the new spin that we're seeing all across the corporate media over at Yahoo News. I'm looking at this one. Why Boston Marathon bombings ignited conspiracies. And they're going on basically saying, you know, anybody out there saying that Sandy Hook and Boston and, well, you know, we're false flag. They're just selling books and DVDs, and really you shouldn't pay attention to them. So we're continuing to see that. That's the new thing. If you think there's such a thing as false flags, you're just a wacko conspiracy kook nut job that no real American will ever listen to. And again, it is a fact of history. Let's go back to the Lavon affair. This happened in the 1954. Israeli agents in Egypt were bombing British and American targets, including a U.S. diplomatic facility, and they left behind evidence framing Egyptians and Egyptian Muslims. And then one of the bombs went off prematurely. The Egyptian police caught the guy, found he was an agent of Israel. Israel's immediate reaction is, oh, it's an anti-Semitic plot. This is just, they're saying bad. The anti-Semites are saying bad things about you. Don't want to listen to the Egyptians because they're anti-Semites, and you should never listen to anybody we tell you is an anti-Semite. And it didn't really work because in the public trial, it came out unquestionably. These agents were agents of Israel. They were working for Israel. Huge scandal. It got pinned on, I think it was the minister of the, I forget what his exact office was. Pinchon Lavon was forced to resign over it, although it looks like he himself was framed by his own subordinates who went out and did this. And Israel was forced to officially acknowledge what they did and apologize to Egypt, not unlike the current furor over the attack on the humanitarian aid flotilla that killed all those Turkish nationals and one American citizen. And that's what Israel does. Go out and cause trouble. Oh, suspicions of us. You're just being an anti-Semite. Go away. And it happened over and over and over again. So there are false flags, despite Rachel Maddow's out there foaming at the mouth saying, there's no such thing, don't believe it, just believe what we tell you, we're the corporate media, we would never lie to you, and they go on and on and on about that. All right, we're going to grab some phone calls here. Pete in Los Angeles, aloha. Pete, welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, I just want to say that start off, Levon Fair is a great example, but an even better example is Operation Gladio, which went on for 50 years. 50 years.
Yes.
Killed hundreds, including former prime ministers, and that was definitely traced back to the CIA and killing our own allies and so on.
Yeah.
At any rate, it may be ongoing right now in the Middle East.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. I mean, we're finding out now these two Boston brothers were being trained at U.S.-sponsored workshops on how to destabilize the Russian satellite nations. Yeah, that's exactly how it's done.
And then remember earlier within the last 4 weeks, Mike, that they talked about that South American thing that goes back as far as Kissinger, where the South Americans would kill people for us and we kill people for them. And
it's to maintain deniability. It's to maintain.
That's right.
They do the same thing with Echelon, which is this global information monitoring system. And at least up until recently, when all the legal protections were taken away, all the member nations would spy on the people of the other nations and trade the information, so they could technically say they were not spying on their own people. But that's basically how this stuff gets done.
But Michael, my theory on where this is going is it comes down to the National Defense Resources Preparedness Act.
Yes.
The executive order by Obama, which doesn't require him at all. He can declare an emergency. He doesn't have to consult with Congress. They don't even define what an emergency, what rises to be an emergency.
Those definitions are actually defined in earlier executive orders, and they include, obviously, massive multiple terror attacks, but also, and this is the important part, a financial collapse, a collapse of the American banking systems is considered grounds to declare a national emergency, suspend the Constitution and the Congress, and give the President complete dictatorial powers.
And that's where I think he's going, and I think he wants to do it. If it were me, if I wanted to be a dictator and I were the president, I'd do it right just as Congress adjourns and goes back home. And then they'd never be able to get back by the National Defense Resources Preparedness Act. They don't even have to report to Congress for a year. So he could suspend Congress, take over the airwaves. You'd never hear from Congress again.
I'm not at all surprised here. Now they're trying to figure out a way they can justify shutting down the Internet so that they can put out their lies and their propaganda and not have dissenting voices and contradictory facts show up to embarrass them. Like I said, these people are all lusting to go back to the golden days of the Cold War in the 1950s and 1960s, where they would simply send over their messages to the corporate media. Corporate media would regurgitate them onto the American people, and the American people would have no choice but to say, oh, I guess this is the real world. And it wasn't. They were living in the Matrix back in the 1950s and 1960s.
Right, which they're still doing, only, and they still have their stenographers in the mainstream press, but nobody, their audience is in decline, even with all this heavy coverage of Boston.
The audience for the TV news and the corporate media has been in decline. A few weeks back, Rasmussen said most Americans are now getting their political news from independent media, like Republic Broadcasting. As a matter of fact, Republic Broadcasting set an all-time audience record this last week. Our audience is growing. We're going up. And obviously, I'd like to encourage everybody listening to this show to please share Republic Broadcasting with everybody you know, because we're starting to get the audience away from the corporate propagandists.
Absolutely. Well, anyway, thank you, Michael. All right.
You got it. We're going to switch over to Nick in Japan. Nick, what is on your mind today?
Yes, and sort of talking about the same issue, I was wondering, do you think staying informed is enough? I mean, with 9/11, you'd be really hard-pressed to find anyone that actually believes in the official 9/11 story. Mm-hmm. But even in the considering that, the establishment still chose to start a false flag. And I think staying informed is only one dimension. I think that staying informed is possibly just not enough. And it seems, I'm not a fledgling listener to you.
Mm-hmm.
There are two people that I respect very, very much. I listen to a great deal, and that's you and Ryan Dawson. I do have an issue. The last time I sort of brought this issue up, you sort of routinely dismissed the idea. It's not so much that I'm poking fun at my heroes or anything like that, but in a way I think it is our social responsibility to sort of peacefully, economically boycott the system, sort of starve the beast.
Well, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with that at all. And the more people, and the more people are informed, the less they're going to fall for the lies, whether it's lies about Syria or lies about vaccines. And that ultimately, especially with the latter, if you're not going out and buying all the products you're being encouraged to buy through these various scare tactics, that does, in fact, starve the beast.
Well, it was a system that was employed under Gandhi. It was called Swadeshi, MLK, direct movement.
Yes.
And there was a very interesting African-American CEO of GE who, it was called, I think, the Sullivan Principles. He employed this to sort of bring down South Africa. It was sort of the beginning. He planted the seeds for it under the de Klerk regime. But no, I mean, my position is that you put up a video that was absolutely wonderful with Woody Harrelson. I think it was called Ethos, which talks about social responsibility. And I just feel like, maybe I made the mistake of sort of bringing up Coca-Cola. And I've talked to Ryan about this a few times. It's like every single video he has Coca-Cola. In your situation, it turns out I was wrong. But in his situation, he's got Coca-Cola in the background. And, again, I'm not poking fun. I really respect what Ryan does.
Okay, well, actually, Ryan's actually on the line right now. I think it's to respond to you. Ryan, are you there?
I wasn't even calling to respond.
My apologies, Ryan.
All right. Well, then, Ryan, hang on. I'm going to get to you as soon as I'm done here with Nick. Nick, the reason I got rough on you is you were saying Coca-Cola in the background. I don't drink Coca-Cola. I don't do sodas and stuff like that.
I didn't really choose to highlight Coca-Cola as a system. I'm also in Japan, much like Ryan. A lot of people mistakenly make the mistake and believe that Coca-Cola in Japan doesn't have GMO products. And actually, Japan does. There's a law passed in 2001 that it does allow for the import of GMO products.
All right. Can we go back to your earlier point? I don't want to get off into Coca-Cola and GMO right now. I absolutely support boycotting and pulling free from the system. I support independence. Don't allow yourself to be dependent on the large corporations, the government, the private central bank. Work to build your independence.
Are we sitting on our hands if you say, for example, don't, proverbially putting your head in the sand if you say, well, listen, there's nothing that you need to do. I mean, I'm not saying that.
I'm not saying that. Okay, what I'm saying here.
Well, no, because you said your position last time.
Hang on. Let me clarify the situation here. Let me talk, because we're almost at the commercial break. What I keep saying is, do not initiate violence against the government, because that is what the government wants, has prepared for, has armed itself for, is ready to deal with. I keep saying, if we stay patient, the system is tearing itself apart right now. But yes, boycotts are legitimate. Unplugging from the system is legitimate. Standing up 300 million strong and screaming to the world, we will not be the wallets of last resort for Wall Street's crimes and corruptions. I approve and encourage that. But violence is wrong. Don't initiate violence, but be prepared to defend yourself. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And joining us on the air now is Ryan Dawson. Aloha, Ryan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, I was calling back when you were talking about the Lavon affair or the Operation Susanna. I was just going to mention that it was the Zionist Colonel Binyamin Gevili who framed Lavon, and it was Philip Nathan's son whose bomb went off prematurely.
Okay.
But can I address what the guy was saying? It'll be like less than 1 minute.
Certainly.
Because it's so weird that someone else called from Japan as I was waiting on the line.
We have lots of listeners in Japan right now. Go ahead.
Well, I know, I help you with that. I just quit drinking Coke like 6 days ago, so it's so weird, but not for the reasons he said. Coke comes from Kyoto, and it has sugar instead of cornstarch, which is a little bit better than the U.S. But you got to draw the line at some point on, like, on what you're going to use and not use. I mean, I use Microsoft and YouTube and Google and Facebook, and I don't agree with all the things those companies do either, but they're useful. I can do more damage with them than if I cut myself off from all of that stuff. I mean, you got to draw your line at some point. And unfortunately, a lot of the warmongering companies are just subsidized by government anyway. It doesn't matter whether you buy it or not. Like the big agribusiness, they subsidize them to produce, so it doesn't matter how much they sell. They could pour the milk in the ground and still get paid for it.
And like the banking system, you can take all your money out of the bank. The government just takes your money and puts it back in, or they simply print it up as a new loan at interest and pour it in there. Again, my focus is please do not initiate violence against the government. Be prepared to respond when the government initiates violence against you. Obviously, the American people are not prone to violence. That's why the government is having to create these violent incidents out of thin air to try and sell you the idea that you're all in danger.
I'll tell you a good way to protest, though, other than not joining the military, is to get other people to quit signing up. When you see those people go to high schools and stuff, these recruiters, you need to have your anti-recruiters go in and talk to these kids and go follow these people on the mall and say, no, don't join the military. You're not fighting for freedom. You're fighting to expand corporate interests. And just explain it to people. If we don't join, they don't have any new toys. They're going to have to rely completely on mercenaries. So push them into that corner.
Well, something else you can do, although obviously they're already talking about bringing back the draft, including girls this time, but one of the things you can do around the recruiters is just go out and do a web search and find photographs of our killed and maimed U.S. forces and just have them in a little booklet and say, this is the part they're not telling you.
Let them know they might be handling depleted uranium.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest kept secrets in the military-industrial complex is how many of our veterans have returned from these war zones after handling these munitions and breathing the particulates after they're employed, and they think they're out of the war zone, life is going to be good, they get married, they have children, and there's an epidemic of severe birth abnormalities in the families of these returning veterans. Nobody wants to talk about it. What a horrible, horrible price to visit on the next generation for the sins of this generation.
There's also a cocktail of required drugs and vaccinations that soldiers have to take for their protection, and some of that might be contributing to veteran suicides and mental problems later on. Not just the shock of war, but all the drugs they're forced to take.
Well, we had a caller into the show a while back who said that basically because so many of our young military understand they're not there to protect the United States of America, but to basically force private central banking, grab the oil and all these other things, and they're dealing with this moral strife. And so we had this caller into the show who was in the war zone saying these military doctors are handing out these SSRIs like they're candy. They're spending more for these medications than they do on Black Hawk helicopters. These kids get addicted on them. And again, this is the first war where we're losing more of our troops to suicide than to enemy action. We know there's a link between SSRIs and violence. In fact, we've got a couple of really bizarre stories we're going to get to a little bit later in the show, I hope. And then the kids come home, they're addicted to these things. They go to their own family doctor and say, I need more of these. And the doctor says, sure, have a prescription for these things. We're literally poisoning. Go ahead.
The number of deaths of actual soldiers, they have it about 5,000 now from Iraq and Afghanistan. That's all based on fuzzy math, too. The way they've counted both the Iraqi deaths and the American deaths or Allied deaths is based on fuzzy math, whether it was reported in two different papers or not, and where they died. So if they die in Kuwait or if they die in a hospital somewhere else is not actually in Iraq on the battlefield, it doesn't count as
killed in combat,
killed in action.
Yep.
And so they don't kill. Well, they just died in a hospital, of their wounds or whatever. And all these the number of actual Americans killed is much higher than 5,000, and the number of Iraqis killed is around 1 million, including the 500,000 starved to death by sanctions.
Well, you need to remember, for those of you who are my age and witnessed the Vietnam War, we didn't learn the true number of Americans lost in Vietnam until 7 years after the war was over. And they kept saying, well, we're going back, and maybe it was a little higher. And they basically just sort of fudged it until finally they came out and said it was 60,000 Americans. When the war was going on, we weren't being told how many Americans were really dying in that war. It didn't really get forced into the public until there were so many families who'd lost their kids in the Vietnam War, and they were starting to network and get together and say, obviously, the total number of dead in Vietnam had to be far higher than the government was admitting to. Ryan, thank you for the call. We're going to let you go. Well, actually, do you have anything else?
I'm going to post a story about the fuzzy math numbers on WRH, and that'll be it.
All right, thank you. We're going to let you go. Take a break for commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And looking at the corporate media, they're starting to pull away from Boston because they have a news story, serious chemical weapons. They have weapons of mass destruction. They're using them on their own people. We must invade. We have to go in and save those poor Syrian people from their cruel, evil tyrant dictator. We have to bring them democracy. We have to go in and kill them all until they agree to live their lives our way. So the full court press is on to sell us another war. And I don't think it's going to get any more traction than the Boston bombing did, because the American people are sadder but wiser. We know we're lied to all the time. That's an advantage we have over the people of the 1950s and the 1960s. Back when the people still, for the most part, trusted the federal government, trusted the corporate media. But those days are gone. Those days are gone. Now, getting back to Israel, apparently there's a member of the Knesset who's trying to push forward a new law that would make it legal for settlers in the illegally occupied territories of the West Bank to shoot any Palestinian they merely suspect of wanting to engage in violence or vandalism. They don't have to actually do it. Why'd you shoot him? I thought he was going to come over and paint bad words on my fence. Yep, you're off the hook. Boy, oh boy. Let's see. A little warning from Desert Peace. If you are going into Israel, you can be made, or at least the Shin Bet security services are saying, if when you're passing into Israel and you're coming from the United States, they will demand access to your personal email accounts. Not just your laptop, not just your smartphone, not just your tablet. They will tell you to turn over the passwords to your email account so they can go out and scan all of your email. Another reason not to bother going to Israel. And it's sort of weird they're doing this at the same time they've mounted this huge tourism campaign, Visit Israel, and they've got posters all over the bus stops and everything. And apparently other individuals, at least up in Ireland, they've made up stickers that simply say boycott, and they're slapping them over the word visit. And there's a very good reason not to go to Israel. And there's a lot of good things to see in Israel. The ancient sites, at least those that haven't been whacked on and modified to support a political agenda. But apparently when you go to Israel now from the United States, and probably from other countries as well, the price of being allowed through the border is complete opening up of your email accounts to Israel's security services. So it's getting out of control there. Meanwhile, in a positive note, there was this art gallery, Fredericton's Charlotte Street Art Center, which wanted to put on an exhibit of drawings by Gaza's children depicting how they saw Operation Cast Lead. That was the huge military operation back in 2008 where there had been a 6-month ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And on November 4th, 2008, while America was distracted with their election, Israel broke the ceasefire, flew into Gaza, bombed a bunch of people, killed some Hamas officials. And the next day, Hamas comes out and says, well, I guess the ceasefire is over. And Israel says, aha, Hamas says the ceasefire is over, and they launched Cast Lead, went in and flattened the place. And those children who were not blown to bloody bits basically dealt with their trauma and stress by doing drawings. They were collected up and made into a traveling art show called A Child's View of Gaza. And this Fredericton Charlotte Street Art Center was announced they were going to have a display of it. And, of course, immediately all of Israel's minions were saying, you can't do that. It's anti-Semitic. You can't let people see that there are even children in Gaza at all. They'll start to feel sorry for them, and they'll wonder about all this money that the U.S. is sending Israel to kill these children. You can't have that up there. And the exhibit was postponed, but the good news is that the Charlotte Street Art Center is going to go forward with the exhibition after all. Now, this cast lead killed 1,400 Palestinians, including 300 children. They don't want you to think about that. But starting on April 26th, that's tomorrow, these drawings by Gaza's children about how they saw cast lead are going to go on display. And it's significant because it shows that Israel's iron grip on what you can see and what you can hear and what you can read and, more importantly, what you can know is starting to slip a little tiny bit more. So we're seeing this huge push for more war. They're trying to gin up a war in Syria. They're out there saying, oh, Syria has chemical weapons. It's a repeat of Iraq all over again. They've got weapons of mass destruction. They're coming to kill us. They're torturing their own people. By the way, remember when they were claiming that Saddam Hussein gassed the Kurds? That was a big selling point on that war. And then the U.S. Army War College went in and investigated and found out the Kurds had been gassed with a gas that Saddam did not have, and that Iran was most likely behind that attack because the Kurds were running across the border and causing a ruckus inside Iran. So it's all lies and deceptions. They're just trying to get this global war going as a distraction from the coming financial crash. They've done it twice before. Crash of 1907, get out of it with World War I. Crash of 1929, get out of it with World War II. Crash of 2008, look at all the nations the United States has already invaded. Afghanistan, Myanmar, Central Asia, Iraq, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, Somalia, Sudan, Turkey, Mali, now heading into Syria, then Iran. They are desperate to get this world war ramped up to where everybody says, yes, it's a world war. We have to forget all about Wall Street's crimes and corruptions. We've got to forget about the mortgage-backed security fraud. We've got to forget about the pyramid Ponzi scheme nature of the private central bank. We've got to forget about all the government lies. We've got to stand behind our government and salute the flag and throw our babies onto the Syrian, Iranian, Russian, Chinese bayonets. That's what they're trying to do. Because if the economy collapses first, and it looks like it might, the people of the United States of America, the people of the world, will point the finger of blame squarely where it belongs. Private central banks and their government enablers. And the government enablers are desperate to duck the blame. These are not honorable, responsible people. None of them will stand up and say, yeah, we did something wrong. We accept the responsibility, slap on the handcuffs. Not going to happen. They're going to be out there screaming, it's God's will or somebody else's fault. Blame the terrorists, blame the Syrians, blame whatever. They're just trying to find anybody that they can convince you is the cause of the suffering you are enduring right now. They get pretty desperate out there. It's the Bilderbergers, it's the Knights Templars, it's the Illuminati. No, it isn't. It's that private central bank right in the middle of your downtown business district. That's what did it to you. Over in Iraq, apparently gunmen have taken control of the Iraqi town of Suleiman Bek, about 170 kilometers north of the capital, Baghdad. Iraq's turning into the new Vietnam. The U.S. is still in there killing people, and they're starting to lose ground. The Iraqis want their country back. They don't want a U.S.-approved puppet regime. They don't want private central banking. Seeing the same thing down in Libya. They just bombed the French embassy down there. Meanwhile, as we move forward into this expansion of the war, I get a lot of email from people saying, well, the war could be wrong, but hey, we're going to win it. We spend so much money on all these weapons, we're simply going to outshoot the rest of the world. Maybe, maybe not. It comes down to a question of how much bang are you getting for your buck. Yes, the United States is spending trillions of your dollars on all of these war machines. They don't really work very well for all that money. Other countries are spending much less money, but they're making simple, elegant, reliable weapons. And in that context, simply outspending your enemy isn't a guarantee of victory, especially when you don't have the support of your general population, that these wars are just and necessary. We're seeing this interesting story coming out of Yahoo, and it's a puff piece for the F-35 jet, which has come under a huge amount of criticism. It cost more than the entire gross domestic product of Australia to develop this thing, and it's got all kinds of problems. Can't fly in the rain, can't really fly in clouds, can't be anywhere near lightning going off, the electronics quit working. The naval version can't land on carriers. They've got the arrestor hook too close to the main landing gear. That electronic helmet vision system still doesn't work. And they're finally starting to admit that this plane is probably going to miss its 2017 deadline to be fully operational. They are building them. They're building them defective and deploying them. And then they're going to go back with additional development funding and try and fix them after the fact. And now the Pentagon has finally come out and said that, yeah, in a dogfight it's not going to do very well. If anybody gets their eyes on the plane, despite its radar stealth, if they can get their eye on the plane and get behind it, the F-35 is going to get shot down. We've been hearing all the criticism about this new littoral combat ship, which the Pentagon is admitting it's too lightly armored to survive an attack from the nation that's being invaded. It lacks sufficient firepower to be effective offensively. It's probably going to be a death trap for the crews who are on it. And yesterday they came out and basically said that there are so many problems with its internal computer systems, it's wide open to being hacked. We may have the most expensive weapons on Earth. We don't know that they're very good. Now they're finally admitting that the Patriot missiles used during Operation Desert Stomp did not, in fact, hit 90% of their incoming targets. They didn't even hit 50%. We're looking at all this money that has been invested in the ballistic missile defense system. We now know that the latest generation of Russian MIRV reentry vehicles don't follow ballistic paths. They're maneuverable. They twist and turn, they go up and down, they bob and weave, they corkscrew, which makes a ballistic intercept impossible. And by now I'm sure China has either acquired or copied that principle. The United States may have the most expensive military machine in the entire world. It may not be any more than a gigantic bluff. And again, if you have not seen it, there's a wonderful movie called The Pentagon Wars, which is a dramatization, humorously, of the very real corruptions and problems involved in the development of the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle. I got an email. It's actually up on the net in its entirety. You can go web search for yourself. It's a funny film. Richard Benjamin did a fabulous job lampooning the military-industrial complex in this film. And it is a true story. That's what makes it much more interesting. Now, speaking of economy and money and all the rest of that stuff, there has been a great deal of confusion regarding austerity. Partly going back to the revelation that the spreadsheet that was used to justify austerity contained a calculation error. And the conclusions drawn from that, including the necessity for austerity in country after country, were completely wrong. And as we have seen in so many countries, austerity didn't change the reality of the economic hardship. Well, now the European Union is saying they're going to back off this whole push for austerity, mostly because the public isn't supporting it. Duh. But austerity isn't working, it can't work, and it won't work, because it does not address the core problem, that when you have a privately owned central bank issuing all of the public currency as a loan at interest, debt increases faster than the available money supply. By design, the ultimate outcome of any private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest is a nation and a people absolutely drowning in artificially created debt. Rule by compound interest. And it is no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. Remember what Woodrow Wilson said after signing the Federal Reserve Act. I have unwittingly destroyed my own country. We are no longer a nation of the opinion of free men, but a nation under the duress of a small group of dominant men. And he was absolutely right. The biggest threat to our republic, the biggest threat to the principle of democracy, the biggest threat to humanity as a whole are these private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. And it doesn't matter what all these economists and the governments do, whether it's austerity or quantitative easing or the rest of it, until they are willing to address that core fundamental flaw in the system, none of what they do will work, and none of what they're doing has worked. Over in France, French ministers are openly in revolt against austerity plans of Socialist Party President Hollande. They say he's simply out there trying to placate German demands at the expense of France. And it's always that. They're sacrificing the welfare of the ordinary people to placate the demands of the private central banks. That Federal Reserve note, that's your slave chain. Right there. Coming out with a new $100 bill. It's got prettier, more counterfeit-resistant doo-ha's on it, but it's still a piece of paper and ink loaned to you at interest by that private central bank. It is your slave chain. One of Merkel's top economic advisors has warned Merkel the euro is only going to survive for another 5 years. I don't even give it that long. I'd be surprised if it was still in place by the end of this year. Meanwhile, back to that whole gold and silver thing, U.S. mint sales of gold coins just hit a 3-year high. If the smackdown on gold prices was intended to scare Americans into dumping their physical in exchange for ink and paper Federal Reserve notes so the central banks could scoop it all up and cover their bullion shortfalls, it did not work. They got exactly the wrong response. Everybody's taking advantage of the low prices, grabbing physical gold and silver. And they're paying the added premiums to get it. Portfolio manager Greg Orwell, my mistake, is saying his faith and trust in gold has not wavered, has not changed. By the way, gold is halfway back from the price crush. It's up over $30. It's going back up again as we told you it would. Excuse me. In the non-gold and silver economy, got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Join us on the air, 800-313 America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economy and getting away from silver and gold and the financial markets. And the stock market is up. They're having a real good field day because of all that instantly created money coming out of the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve prints it up and they loan it for pennies on the dollar to the Wall Street speculators, and the Wall Street speculators buy into the stock market, drive the price up, then they sell out, they pay back the bank the loan plus interest, and the extra they put in their pocket. That's what they're doing. That's where all these fortunes on Wall Street are coming from. Out in the real world, manufacturing in the United States is in a decline again. Orders for durable goods have slumped. Durable goods means things like stoves, refrigerators, items you buy that you expect to last for a reasonable amount of time. And orders for those are in a slump because people don't have the money to buy the goods, and they do not want to go back to their credit cards to buy them, and they're just choosing to do without. And it underscores exactly why a political and financial system that grabs all the wealth of the nation to itself is doomed to fail. Because for an economy to function smoothly and efficiently, currency has to be flowing freely at all levels of society, and investment capital has to flow into all necessary sectors of economic development. When it's all piled up all over Wall Street, they're having a great time, and the rest of the nation is dying on the vine. But when you remember that labor precedes capital, when all real wealth is based on the factory workers, the farmers, the people who actually make saleable products, you understand Wall Street's hoisting on its own petard right now. They're not really making the nation richer. They're just fighting with each other over who gets the biggest share of this instantly created ink and paper stuff coming out of the Federal Reserve. We're going to grab a phone call here from the Heretic in Colorado. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, this stuff that you're talking about right now is really poking the beast right in the eyeball, and I think more people need to hear it. And I've been thinking about why people are resistant to quote-unquote waking up. And, see, I like to feel good as much as anybody. Who doesn't? But I don't need to feel good so bad that I have to lie to myself to feel good, you know, to be in denial and stuff. People got to get over this stuff. I appreciate you going on Joyce's show, the Power Hour.
Yes.
I heard you a couple weeks ago, and that's very encouraging. You know, I got this, why can't we all just get along kind of Rodney King attitude? You know,
I think most people could get along if it weren't for these money junkies and hysterical religious and political fanatics who see their own power and personal fortunes arising out of discord, violence, and war.
Yeah. Well, just the willingness to accept atrocities. I mean, I'm old enough. I'm not as old as you, but no, I'm not. I mean, what I'm saying is I remember Vietnam on TV when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
All right? And they don't show it anymore. So if you don't see it, it doesn't exist.
Well, that's certainly true. We got to take a break for station identification. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm starting to already see popping up in various places around the corporate media. Now they're trying to tie the Boston bombing to Iran. Iran was behind this. Apparently this former CIA spy who was at the forefront of screaming about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction is now out there saying Iran is responsible for the Boston Marathon bombing and more attacks are going to come. Trying to keep that fear level up there. Folks, I'm going to tell you straight. If there's another big bang, it's the U.S. government and or Israel to try and get this war with Iran going that they have been lusting for since the 1980s. Since the 1980s, they've been screaming, Iran's going to get the bomb, Iran's going to get the bomb, woof, 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 woof. Or in Netanyahu's case, nuclear duck, nuclear duck, nuclear duck. All wars in history are started with lies, fraud, and deception. And this is no exception here. So they're just ramping up the propaganda. They can't get any traction because we, the people of the United States of America, understand we got lied to about Iraq, about Pearl Harbor, about all this stuff. All right, getting back to the economy, we're seeing a story from Global Research. Basically, the headline is, no bank deposits will be spared from confiscation. Ever since they did the haircut, which has turned into a castration over in Cyprus, and which, by the way, didn't work, they're still close to 20 billion euros short of balancing their books. Now we're hearing, there's all this debate, Bernanke's up there saying, it'll never happen here. And we're seeing signs all over those nations with private central banks. Yeah, that's going to be their next step to keep their little Ponzi pyramid going. They're just going to reach into your savings account and scoop out handfuls of your wealth to prop up their little pyramid scheme a little bit longer. Will the U.S. government do it? Of course they will. When have they ever hesitated to sell out the ordinary American people to serve the money junkies? Meanwhile, over at the Securities and Exchange Commission, there's growing pressure to require publicly traded corporations to disclose their political contributions. Now, in theory, political candidates have to list who they're getting money from, but in recent decades, we've seen donations that come in under obviously bogus names, bogus addresses. There was a big scandal during the Clinton campaign where there was all this money coming in that listed the Democratic National Headquarters as the donor's address, and obviously that can't be the case. So now they want to attack the problem of secret campaign funding from the other side, and they're asking the SEC to require full disclosure of political donations by publicly traded corporations. Not going to happen. The SEC isn't going to go along with this any more than they went along with all these 12 years of recommendations they investigate Bernie Madoff. But it does reveal the extent to which the money power has in fact corrupted the nation, as Thomas Jefferson predicted it would. Let's see. Michigan House has unanimously passed an NDAA nullification bill. Somewhere down the road, there's going to be a constitutional crisis between states' rights and the federal government over who's in control. We know the federal government is pushing as hard as they can for complete control of the United States of America, to completely bypass the states, to basically reduce them to vestigial ceremonial remnants of when this nation was a republic. It's getting dangerous out there. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And Aloha America, welcome back to the show here. We're going to grab some phone calls. Tom in Texas. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Brother Mike. You're doing a great job there, man.
Thank you.
But I was just wanting to talk about the double standard with the relationship with Israel and the United States.
Yes.
Aren't they trying to push through a bill or something that where someone with an Israeli passport can just walk into the country without any scrutiny?
That's true, but it's not reciprocal. People in the United States are not allowed to simply walk into Israel with the passport. In fact, Israel is demanding they have a right to deny entry to any American citizens who happen to be of Arab ancestry.
Well, you just made my point, sir. Thank you.
You got it.
I mean, this is our closest ally, the only democracy in the Middle East. But anyway, for my second deal, about 3 weeks ago, a friend of mine went on a job interview and is ganged up on her. There's like 4 or 5 people popping questions, and they asked her about her Facebook page. And she said, I don't have one. And they're going, why? And she responded, well, I enjoy my privacy. And they just couldn't comprehend that.
No, I understand that. I mean, I do have a Facebook page, but I just use it for promoting stories for my website. I have a smattering of old pictures of Claire and I up there, but I don't put my personal data online. It's nobody's business. And outside of what really happened in this radio show, I don't run around with the illusion that the rest of the world's population has any curiosity about me at all.
Well, I mean, is it detrimental now that someone does not have a Facebook page? I don't have one. I don't want one.
It's seen as detrimental because the government is on this idea that they can learn all they need to learn about us by scanning our Facebook pages and our tweets and our text messages. And frankly, especially if you're single, people lie on Facebook. They overinflate themselves. Their virtual identities are how they wish they were, not how they really are. So it's unreliable as an intelligence source.
Well, anyway, I just wanted to point out the unfairness of some of the things that's going on with our only ally in the Middle East.
Yes.
And say I don't have a Facebook page either. I don't intend to get one. I enjoy my privacy also. And I'm happy that your listeners are just like, it's going off the wall here. I'm happy that there's so many people are starting to pay attention now.
Yeah, I am too, especially the younger crowd. Especially the young people are getting clued in, and that is very, very reassuring.
Yeah, I had hired some teenage kids in the neighborhood to do some work with me. Rather than hiring a powered pallet jack, I got these kids in the neighborhood to come do all the back work for me. And I found out that one of them had recently joined the service, either the Air Force or the Navy. I can't remember which one. But anyway, he'd already signed up, and I was trying to talk sense to him, and I'm seldom speechless, but I was without words on this one. He said, oh, well, I've scored really high on the aptitude test, and I'm going to have an office job.
Okay.
And I'm, well, what do I say? I'm just dropped the subject then. Well, good for you. You're going to get an office job with the Air Force, and you're not going to be in danger, huh? So that makes it okay.
Well, that's a reason why a lot of people do go into the Navy and the Air Force is they're far less likely to wind up in the actual combat zones in the context of these police actions that the U.S. goes into. And I remember back during Vietnam when they were holding the lotteries, kids whose number came up right at the very, very top would rush right down and enlist in the Navy or the Air Force so they didn't have to be drafted into the infantry and wind up on the front lines.
Well, that made sense back then.
Yes.
But, if they bring back the draft, I don't know what these kids are going to do.
Well, it is a terrible situation, and something else you need to remember when your son or daughter is being recruited by the military. They'll make all kinds of promises about what you're going to learn and where you're going to go and what you're going to do, and they don't have to keep a single one of them. The courts have ruled repeatedly that promises made by military recruiters are not legally enforceable. So your kid signs up for the Navy because he thinks he's going to become a nuclear reactor control technician, and he winds up spending his entire time in service peeling potatoes. and he comes on out and he says, I don't have a career unless I want to peel potatoes the rest of my life. But that really does happen.
Yeah, back in the 70s, I was going to join the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
And the recruiter made the mistake of letting me take the contract home and really read it. And at the bottom of every page in fine print, that was back in the day with you could join on the buddy system.
Yes.
You know, you could go all through the service if you joined with somebody else. But the fine print at the bottom of every page says no guarantees.
Yeah, that's exactly what it says.
Yeah.
And
but anyway, I didn't sign up.
I don't blame you. I actually, coming out of high school, I briefly considered joining the Air Force because I love flying an aircraft, but with my eyesight, I figured I'd spend my entire career repairing helicopter transmissions or something glorious like that. So
yeah, that's a good job too.
Yeah, well, not compared to what I'm doing now.
Well, you're doing very well at what you're doing there, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to bye-bye. We're going to switch over to Ruth in Chicago. Aloha, Ruth. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I sent you an email. The Chicago Board of Options Exchange has been down. Their desk that trades market volatility options has been down all day.
Interesting.
We're waiting for a report.
I did get your email, and I did put it in the reader's letters section. I didn't have time to look into it. But isn't it interesting that among all these other derivatives that have caused so many problems, they've got this other one where you're betting on the market's volatility, and I wonder if this has anything to do with that situation where somebody broke into AP's Twitter feed, posted a message that the White House had been bombed, and that triggered a huge amount of volatility. And maybe this is the mechanism by which somebody made a huge amount of money off of this stunt.
Well, tomorrow is Friday, and if all the people that read entrails and twigs and leaves are claiming 425 is going to be a black day. So I don't know if it's down on a glitch or if it's crashed. The second thing, there's something bothering me. I saw somewhere on the Internet that drones do not show up on the radar screen at airports for the air controllers to make pilots aware they're in the area.
Yes.
Is there any way somebody can verify that?
Yeah.
Because when Obama closes down all these airports, these small airports, there's going to be drones everywhere that pilots will not be aware of and run into.
Well, the military drones that are being deployed into these countries we're not really at war at are by design stealthy. They don't want them detected and shot down, although apparently a lot of them are just falling out of the sky because of manufacturing defects. This could be correctable quite easy. I'm going to presume that the FAA will require what's called a blip transponder, or probably even an encoding transponder on the drones that is equivalent to what is now on civil aviation, where most FAA air control traffic radars, they don't do a skin paint. What they're searching for are active transponders that will say, here I am, here's my flight number, here's my current altitude. For the smaller drones, the little tiny ones the police are using, that's a problem. Even if they're not intentionally stealthy, they have such a small radar cross-section, and because they don't have transponders, they will not show up on civil aviation radars. We know there's already been a couple of near misses with commercial pilots coming in and saying, there was a drone here, we almost hit it. And, of course, it completely invalidates the idea of using drones for anti-terror, because all a real terrorist, if there are any, has to do is go into these industrial zones that are always around the airports and set up shop there, because drones will not be overhead because of the possible interference with the terminal control area.
Well, it's going to make it difficult for people taking a vacation. Driving down the road, you're going to need a spotter to look up to make sure the planes are not falling out of the sky from hitting drones.
Well, that's definitely a real concern, and over and above that is just the drone itself falling out of the sky. Again, because they do. Due to manufacturing defects, breakdowns, it's been a major problem. The U.S. has lost quite a few drones over these other countries. They weren't shot down. They just fell out of the sky. And these smaller drones that are being bought by these police departments, if they lose direct radio control, they can just fly off any direction they want. Yeah, it's going to be a problem. I think the first time one of these police drones comes down and smashes into something significant, there's going to be a huge public outcry saying these things are more dangerous than the terrorists are.
And they're already built. It's not something a change they can make in a planning stage.
Well, they can always add a transponder after the fact. And just because they're built does not justify putting them up in the sky if they are a danger to public safety. And I believe they actually are.
One more thing, and your program is fantastic, Mike.
Thank you.
It is wonderful. One more thing. I saw over on Drudge that Obama, starting next week, the flood gauges around the country, the federal flood gauges are going to be turned off. Now, I'm about 6 blocks from that, all that flooding and the slain. People are, instead of a car, you now need a kayak or a canoe.
Yeah.
Or rowboat, which is a switch because, Chicago winters can get ugly and a lot of people have snowmobiles.
Well, they're already dealing with massive flooding as it is. What I think it is, this shutting off the flood control meters, furloughing the FAA air controllers, it's a scare campaign to get the American people to say, all right, please raise our taxes so we can keep the country funded. And the reality is the money is just going to go to Israel and Wall Street and the war machine. All the things we pay taxes for are being shut down. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you, Ruth. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Mike in New York. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I just made a comment on, I think the gentleman that called earlier mentioning about someone looking for a work and job and asking for a Facebook. I wonder if that has anything to do with the recent last minute somebody put an alteration in that was defeated in a Congress vote that said that employers can legitimately ask employees for social media login details as a condition of employment.
Yeah, when the job market being what it is, and we know that the unemployment is much worse than the government is admitting to, companies that are hiring are just getting extremely abusive in terms of intrusion into potential employees' private lives. And I don't know about you, I wouldn't go to work for a company that demanded my Facebook page. Not that I have anything on the Facebook page that's of concern, it's a matter of principle. And certainly in those times when I have been in a position to make hiring decisions on behalf of companies I've worked for, including my own at one point, it's not something I would ever ask. It's none of my business. But these corporations are getting into this complete fascist mindset where they want to know everything about your life so that, you're not going to be one of those troublemakers who think independently, are you?
Yeah, I thought that may have something to do with what he was mentioning, that's all. Thanks, appreciate it.
You got it here. And another possible consideration, we know that many corporations are engaged in very questionable behaviors, especially the financial industry and the pharmaceutical industry and a lot of other companies, and the last thing they need if they're going to start screwing their own customers and investors is somebody on the inside who might have a proclivity for those outmoded concepts of honesty and truthfulness and justice for the ordinary people. So they want to screen those out. I mean, I understand that the hiring process for Goldman Sachs is worse than an FBI's giving you a top-secret clearance, and the dress code is something like 15 pages long. I mean, that's how completely totalitarian these large corporations are becoming here. We're going to grab another phone call. Carrie in Oklahoma. Aloha, Carrie. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? You're on the air.
Yeah. Well, I expect that private control of the economy will lead to its own collapse.
I think this economy is clearly headed for collapse. It's all based on a private central bank that is itself a Ponzi scheme. It has to collapse. Look how desperate they are to try and keep it going. They're literally robbing their own customers' bank accounts.
Just like a man that published a blog from 1848. You know what it is? Predicted this will happen.
Well, a lot of people have been predicting what happened. Even Vladimir Lenin predicted when American capitalism failed, it would have to go fascistic.
We need socialism, social solution.
Okay, your phone line is breaking up here, and I'm having trouble understanding you. We're going to let you go and switch over to Paul in North Carolina. Aloha, Paul. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How are you today?
Doing good.
Yeah, I had two issues with the Boston thing. I just saw a Washington Post newspaper, and it said that Sarnoff did not have a gun when he was in the boat.
That's correct.
So I don't pay attention to the mainstream media, so I don't understand how they're explaining how he shot himself or why there was a firefight if he had no weapon.
Well, they're sort of hemming and hawing on that one, and they're just shrugging their shoulders. And again, I think the reason that MIT cop was killed, and they're saying now it was execution style, sitting in his own car. Somebody just walked up to him and popped him. And I think the reason that was done and framed on the Tsarnaev brothers was to put the Boston police into this shoot first, ask questions later, because the perpetrators of the Boston bombing wanted both these brothers dead. And we know the lengths they went to kill the older brother. They had him arrested, stripped naked, put in a police car. The next day, he's dead. They're saying, oh, he died in a firefight. His younger brother ran over him. Then we had a witness come forward saying that, no, a police SUV ran him down, and then they shot him. So I think the only reason that the younger brother survived was the fear that if both these brothers were killed, it was going to trigger riots all across the world the way the collapse of the Benghazi false flag did.
This is beyond flimsy. I mean, this thing fell apart so fast, and I don't know how any sane person can remotely buy the corporate media government story.
Well, thank goodness for the United States that there are so many insane people in the corporate media and in government.
All right. One other question for you. What's your take? What's your position on the whole idea that it was actors at the bombing? I saw some piece where an amputee was there and they spread blood around and they made it look like he had his leg blown off. Where do you stand on that whole story?
Well, they were having a bomb drill. There's no question about that. And when you have one of these disaster drills, you have to have fake bombs and fake victims. And the same is true of any drill. When I was, all the way back years ago when I was at Cal State Fullerton, they had a mass disaster drill, and they came over to our theater department and said, you're all going to play victims, and they poured Max Factor blood all over us. So I have no doubt there were some fakers there, which the media has seized on and tried to present as real victims. And that's another reason why we have to keep pointing out there is a link between these so-called terror drills and the actual acts of terrorism. Somebody even postulated that one of the two bombs, the one that did go off across from the Boston Public Library, really was just black powder and smoke, and the other bomb was the one that really caused the real damage and destruction. But let's just stay focused on the fact that the official story is a crock, and just go forward from there. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm just looking on the corporate media, and they're pushing this story that these two brothers planned an attack in New York City, and they were going to set off 6 bombs, and they were going to be here. First of all, the older brother is dead. Nobody's talked to him. He can't speak on his own behalf. The younger brother, we are told, cannot talk. The FBI supposedly, through sign language and the rest of it, communicated with him for about 16 hours. Now we've been told that since he's been informed of his Miranda rights, as if he didn't already know them from TV and movies, is not communicating anymore. So where are they getting this information? And the reason I'm concerned, of course, is this idea that as the Boston bombing cover story crumbles, the perpetrators have a very powerful motive to stage a new attack, bloodier, more horrible. First of all, to distract from all the holes in the first story, and again, because if the goal of the Boston bombing was to get everybody into a bloodlust to go out and kill Muslims wherever they are, Syria, Iran, the rest of it, it failed. It utterly failed. And we're hearing about this upcoming federal government, New York Police Department terror training drill involving airborne weapons in the New York subway system. And so Boston may just be a warm-up. And there may be the main event. And now, ladies and gentlemen, for the main event. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll watch them die. And we're off to another false flag attack. And I'm somewhat alarmed by all the corporate media saying, oh yeah, New York was on, they were planning New York, a big one in New York. And they're pushing that awfully hard. So Again, what the government did right after TWA 800. Couldn't keep a lid on the story. Olympic Park bombing is a distraction. We're going to grab a phone call here. Albert in New Jersey. Aloha. Albert, welcome to the show. What's on your mind today? Albert, are you there? Okay, Albert, your phone line is just really messed up. Can you slow down and try again? I can't understand you. Try calling back. We're going to let you go and try and call back and see if you get a clean connection. All right. Now, this is a story I wanted to talk about yesterday, and I didn't get time to do about it. We've all heard about the Tuskegee syphilis study, where all these hundreds of black men were deliberately infected with syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease, between 1932 and 1972, and the disease was allowed to proceed to death just to see what happened, even after syphilis became curable. Even after syphilis was not a dangerous, deadly disease any longer, they allowed this thing to go out. Shows the complete, utter heartlessness and lack of humanity of these people doing these tests. Now there's a story that's coming out of the last decade, 2000 through 2007, I think it was, where they were doing medical experiments on premature babies, involving increasing or decreasing the amount of oxygen in their incubators. And it was already known before this study that insufficient oxygen was going to cause problems and permanent damage, and too much oxygen could cause problems and damage, but they still went ahead with this test. 23 universities were involved, government-funded experiment, and yes, some of the babies who were subjected to too little or too much oxygen developed permanent, crippling disabilities. And the scandal is the consent forms that were given to the parents did not mention the potential for these experimental treatments to cause permanent damage to the babies. And they already knew there were going to be problems. There's another story, and this is coming out of Raw Story, where it turns out that hospitals actually make more money off of botched surgeries than doing the surgeries right. You go in, you get your tonsils out, you go home, you pay the bill, end of story. You go into the hospital for a surgery, oh, we're sorry, we left a sponge inside. We have to go back in. That's another bill. Oh, we closed it, we left something disconnected in there. The hydrostatic flammer stand is supposed to go into the doohickey over there. We forgot to put it back together. We have to go back in again. Another surgery, another bill. And they basically discovered that hospitals where there is a high record of surgical mistakes have a 330% higher profit margin than hospitals where they do the surgeries right on the first time. There is a profit motive to botch these things up. See the doctor in there, you know, and he's saying, scalpel, retractor, whoops. And the patient goes, whoops? What do you mean, whoops? Well, I'm going to have to do another. That's why you hear all these stories about, oh, repeated surgeries to deal with the issue. They don't want to get it right the first time. If they do, that's the end of it. No more money. Just amazing. We've incentivized failure. We've incentivized corruption. We've incentivized crime. This nation has gone exactly the wrong direction. Going to grab a phone call. Clarence in Oklahoma. Osseo, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, Osseo to you too, Mike. What I wanted to address was, I listened to you for, so long. I've gathered, I can figure, we're within about a year of each other in age, plus or minus one, so I'm going to give it away. But, you were talking about earlier about the draft, and you almost joined the Air Force.
Yes.
Well, I was stupid enough to drop out of college during that time. Mm-hmm. And I figured, why wait around and at my parents' house and get the letter, greetings from them. And so I did join the Air Force. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, it kind of worked out, because at the time I did, the Vietnam War was winding down, and it's a 4-year sign-up, but they had too many people in my particular field, and they started letting them go. When I got back to the States, I got out a year early, 51 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So I only did 3 years. That's not bad. But that's beside the point. What I wanted to mention was, if they bring back the draft, and I used to be one of these knee-jerk people who used to, say, well, you're a citizen of this country, you owe the country this and that and whatever else, and including service.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe so, but not necessarily in the military. But that's the only thing people think of when I think about that. And I was just thinking, you said there's talk about bringing it back, men and women,
yeah,
which they have in Israel.
Yeah, Charlie Rangel's draft bill includes drafting young women into the armed forces.
Yes, and they do it in Israel. They have for forever.
Isn't it funny how this country is turning into Israel and we're all being treated like Palestinians?
Absolutely.
What an amazing coinkydink there. Listen, I want to make a comment here. We're running out of time on the show, and I want to get this point out there.
I'll say one more comment after that.
Okay. In this nation, the American people, I think that the vast majority of Americans would gladly volunteer to serve in the military or some other form of national service as long as they felt genuinely that the nation needed it. When you have them talking about a draft, it's because the American people understand these wars are not about protecting the United States of America from a foreign aggressor. These wars are about invasion and conquest and the imposition of private central banking on the rest of the world. And they understand that their service in the military does not serve the American people at all. It serves the private money junkies. The same thing with national service in terms of working and fixing our infrastructure. A lot of that is going on. There's no national registry or program, but in every community across America, you've got ordinary people who are standing up and trying to deal with the problems that are around them, like the Feed the Hungry programs. But what the talk about national service is so the government can say, we will decide where and what you will do. I don't need the federal government to tell me that it's time to go out and start trying to help feed the hungry around here. I can make that choice on my own. That's my freedom as an American citizen. I consider it part of my First Amendment right to freedom of expression. Go get some food, give it to the hungry. We don't need a national organization structure to direct us. The only reason for a national organization to direct us is so that we serve the government and the money junkies' interests, and we are sent out to work on what some favored political crony wants us to work on. As far as the draft is concerned, we're already seeing an economic covert draft across the country. All the government has to do is go in and wreck the economy in a community, and all these kids coming out of high school and college can't find jobs. All that's left is to go down to the recruiters. My wife and I talked to a bunch of kids. We were down at the local Denny's, which went out of business. You know the economy is really bad when Denny's can't make it. And this Denny's was located in the same block where there are all these military recruiting offices, and there were all these kids with Air Force T-shirts, and we just stopped and talked to them. And they basically said they didn't want to go into the Air Force. There was simply nothing else available for them to live on. It was Air Force or live at home or possibly be homeless. And it's an economic draft. It's not portrayed as such in the corporate media, but that's where they are. But they still don't have enough bodies to win a prolonged conventional global war. And so now that's why Rangel is out there saying, we've got to draft men, we've got to draft women. And I'm not being sexist here when I say that I do not agree with women in combat roles. But if you're thinking about the post-war years, the nation that can rebuild its population faster has an economic advantage. When you put the females at risk in a war, it is a sign the government isn't thinking any further than winning the war. And they're not thinking about what's good for the nation afterwards. When a man and a woman get together, the man's contribution to the next generation is 7-10 minutes. The woman takes 9 months. And because of that, if you're thinking about rebuilding your nation after the war, you've got to protect those women. They are precious for that very, very reason. And I'm not being sexist here because I understand that any one woman can go out and be in the military, and especially in places like the Navy or the Air Force, they're certainly the equal of men. But you are basically cutting your future population growth when you place those women at risk in combat roles. Okay, Clarence?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And my one more comment, which is short, less than a minute. If they do reinstitute the draft, they're going to have to bring back ROTC. I don't mean the one that you saw in college and I saw in college. That means run off to Canada.
No, actually, I understand what you mean. And by the way, for people who really genuinely want a career in the military, ROTC was actually a pretty cool idea.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, okay, I'll let you go and let you go ahead with whatever. Yeah, I know you got other stuff to say and whatever. So.
Yes, I do. All right. Thanks an awful lot, Clarence. Have a good day here. Getting back to science and health issues here, there is a new bill going through the Texas legislature right now that will allow doctors to decide when you die, to give them the authority to put a do not resuscitate order on your chart, regardless of the wishes expressed by the patients or their families. In other words, you're having difficulty breathing, you're in the hospital, you know, you want to go on living, your family wants you to go on living, the doctor can say, nah, not worth it. I can just see the conversations that are going to happen right now in those hospital wings there. Does this patient have any money left? No, doctor. Does this patient have any insurance left? No, doctor. All right, he can die now. Just amazing, amazing stuff here. Britain has launched a major campaign to get the measles, mumps, rubella jab. There's a measles crisis out there. Actually, the measles crisis and the mumps crisis of 2009 are happening to the people who got the shots. It's all about the money. They're waving this new Chinese bird flu, and now they've even added another one. The snail flu is coming to get you. Go out and buy lots and lots and lots of vaccines. Meanwhile, interesting story, this was over at newsforge.com. Apparently a woman claiming she was God set fire to a car at a gas station. This is down in Daytona Beach. Her own car. Got out of the car, says she's God, poured gas all over it, set it on fire. Now we have this other story. This is over in Great Britain. Mother of two. Woman, 38 years old, medical director, the star at the pharmaceutical company where she works, got into a very minor traffic accident with her car, left the car, and lay down in the slow lane and was killed by a passing truck. And it actually says she was on antidepressants. Prescription antidepressants, in particular SSRIs, have a long and well-documented history of triggering violence and suicide and strange behavior in the patients who take them. Virtually all of the mass shooters being waved around at us to impose gun control in the U.S. were either on or withdrawing from these dangerous medications. 10% of the general population are on these medications that lead to poor decision making, and we may presume 10%, if not more, of our government are on these medications, which would go a long way to explaining some of the stupidity we've seen recently. In this post-Saddam's nukes climate of public skepticism, whoever thought this Boston bombing was going to fly, they had to be on antidepressants. They're listening to their wishful thinking and thinking that's reality. Amazing stuff here. All righty, let's see. Again, over at Blacklisted News, have you noticed how the government is always changing the maximum allowable rate for things like radiation and melanin and stuff in your food? They've been doing it with all kinds of contaminants. To save the corporations money, it costs us money to really do pure food. Just tell them that what we're selling them is okay. And it turns out 55% of ground beef, 39% of chicken are contaminated with superbugs. You know what we mean by superbugs? We're talking about these bugs that grow inside these animals who are antibiotic resistant because these animals are dosed with antibiotics, so they're not getting infections from being crowded into these little tiny factory cages. And you're being exposed to these. Now, obviously, if you really cook your food thoroughly, the risk goes down, but it shows this incredible recklessness when it comes to the safety and health of the American people. The government is not looking out for you. They're treating you like livestock to be used, harvested, to breed more soldiers, to go on out. The government has zero respect for you. That's what these stories mean. Coming up on a commercial break, we're going to be right back with the last segment of our show today. Couple of words about Fukushima. That's in the news again, and we'll be right Aloha back. America, welcome back to the show here. We're going to talk a little bit about what's going on over at Fukushima. I know we haven't touched on that in a while, but there are some very alarming developments. The International Atomic Energy Agency, when it's not busy hurling rumor and innuendo at Iran, is now warning that the cleanup of the Fukushima power station is likely to take far longer than the original estimate of 40 years. If you are my age, this problem is never going to be solved in your lifetime. And the IAEA came in and encouraged TEPCO to improve the stability of the facility, probably in response to the fact that their cooling system has been knocked offline more than a few times in the last couple of weeks. It's very fragile. There's no backup system to it. Why is cooling necessary for a nuclear power station that isn't working? Well, because all of those used up fuel rods generate heat from what are called decay products. Left by themselves, they will eventually get hot enough to burst into fire. They have to be kept in cooling tanks. And the cooling liquid in there, in order that it does not simply boil off, has to be taken off and cooled and pumped back in. And that's what they're dealing with over there. Now, videos and photos from the facility are showing very strange materials continue to percolate out from the ruined cores of those reactors. We're hearing that, and we've seen this ourselves since it happened. Japan and TEPCO and General Electric and even the IAEA grossly downplayed the amount of contamination coming out of there, the cesium releases in particular. Remember when Reactor 3 blew up and it was this huge cloud of sickly green smoke, and they were trying to tell us it was just a hydrogen explosion. Well, I got a news flash for you. When hydrogen burns, it makes steam, which is white. And that sickly yellow-green happens to be the exact color of the quadrivalent form of plutonium oxide. And now they're acknowledging plutonium is being found far out from the plant. It was not contained. But that's okay, because the government of Japan is now saying it's okay for vegetables grown around the power station to go back onto the market and to a store near you. They've just raised the maximum amount of radioactivity that you can safely be exposed to, just like Obama just did with the drinking water. Remember back when Fukushima happened and Ann Coulter was out there saying a little radiation is actually good for you? And it was complete nonsense. Complete nonsense. Now, we talk about building a nation, building a future nation on innovation and invention, and a lot of people are spending a lot of time in their garages inventing the next great thing, or a lot of doctoral candidate students are inventing something as part of their doctoral thesis with which they hope to make money after they leave school. And it turns out there's a major problem, because the government, the U.S. government, reviews all patent applications, and they can issue a secrecy order on new patents. No review, no challenge. And they can simply shut down the inventors and the students and say, what you've made is critical of the national security. You're not allowed to do anything. You have to find some other way to pay off your student loans. I hear the music. It is time to get out of here. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Please make sure that you are telling all your friends, family, neighbors, social media about Republic Broadcasting. Our audience is growing, but we need to reach those people who still do not recognize the matrix that surrounds them. Thanks an awful lot for your help in getting the word out. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.